So what I did was I gathered together a set of documents, books, articles, speeches, whatever I could find, by people who explicitly espouse the use of torture, rendition, other extreme measures, in an effort to make sense of their thinking. So I looked, for example, at people like Richard Posner and Alan Dershowitz, among others, the former director of the CIA, Porter Goss, speeches he had made to Congress and so on. And what I was able to discern is that there are certain recurring patterns, certain motifs, certain beliefs that taken together amount to a kind of distinct conceptual paradigm or belief system, really. And that we can fairly readily compare this or contrast it with the beliefs under which we operate. What I mean by we is that, lawyers, jurists, people committed to the rule of law. So to give you a sense of this, it seems uncontroversial to assert that we all generally subscribe to maybe three basic propositions. We assume that terrorism is a crime. It doesn't pose an existential threat to society. That the best way to deal with the threat of terror, with terrorist suspects, is to afford them due process rights and to treat it as a criminological problem. We also assume that no illegal measures can be justified. There can't be this space of exception, there can't be activities taking place in back rooms, dark spaces beyond any accountability and so on. We don't subscribe to that view. And perhaps at the very core of our belief structure is the absolute prohibition on torture. I think our working assumption is that if we give up that proposition, something about the very character of our legal system would change. It's so fundamental to our notion of a government of law. So by contrast, if we move to, we look now at the belief structure that animates national security, I would suggest that the very core belief at the forefront of this imagination is the fear of an imminent nuclear or mass terror attack and the catastrophic consequences that would follow. So what I mean is, if you look at books or articles or speeches or case briefs where someone is defending the use of extreme measures, you will find there will be some invocation of the catastrophic scenario. To give you an idea, I'm just going to read a passage from Richard Posner's 2004 book, Not a Suicide Pact, the Constitution in a Time of Emergency. In that book, he supports the use of indefinite detention without charge, increased surveillance, a presidential power to suspend habeas corpus, and explicitly he espouses torture. He says that in some cases it's necessary. At the outset of the text, he writes, "The research I've been conducting for the past several years on catastrophic risks, international terrorism, and national security has persuaded me that we live in a time of grave and increasing danger. In the early years of the 21st century, a city can be destroyed by an atomic bomb the size of a melon, which if coated with lead would be undetectable. Large stretches of a city can be rendered uninhabitable, perhaps for decades, merely by the explosion of a conventional bomb that has been coated with radioactive material. Smallpox virus, bioengineered to make it even more toxic, and vaccines ineffectual, then aerosolized and sprayed in a major airport, might kill millions of people." So I'm suggesting that if you look around, you'll find this kind of a statement, this sort of sentiment commonly invoked in defense of extreme measures. Another basic belief has to do with what is called the ticking bomb scenario. I don't want to go into that in any real detail, except to say two basic things about it. The best arguments against the ticking bomb scenario as a justification for torture suggest that it's simply implausible, that you're never going to find all of the all of the conditions that would justify the use of torture in reality. But even the best of the critics, David Lubin, concede that there's something about it that continues to bewitch us. That's his word. And so for advocates of extreme measures, it makes sense in these extreme cases. But my point is that because it makes sense to them in those extreme cases, it kind of contaminates and inflects their view of all counter-terror practices, so that, for example, at Guantanamo, it made sense to carry out waterboarding, which they claim led to actionable intelligence. But then the thinking leaks out into all situations, so that almost all counter-terror investigations are a kind of ticking bomb scenario. I'm only going to point to two more propositions in their belief structure. One more would be that the lives and safety of citizens is absolutely more important than the rights of foreigners. And the best illustration of this proposition that I can point to is the passage in the Supreme Court of Canada decision in Suresh, where the court says that in some cases, albeit extreme, there may be instances where we have to send a person, we have to deport a person where they may face the risk of torture. That will be a breach of Section 7, but it would be justified under Section 1, which was a very disturbing decision and remains so to many people. There is, in my opinion, no way to make sense of that logic without the broader proposition that citizens' lives are absolutely more important than foreigners' rights. The final proposition I would point to is the claim that what is at stake in the threat of terrorism today, given its catastrophic possibilities, is the very survival of the state, the very survival of society as we know it. They are, in other words, drastic about the potential consequences. Again, I'm going to just give you a brief sense of this. This is from Michael Ignatieff, who does not espouse extreme measures, but captures this sentiment in his 2004 book, The Lesser Evil. He writes, "An act of nuclear terror would have unprecedented consequences. It would not be like an invasion, a conquest or occupation, but would rather entail the disintegration of our institutions and way of life. A succession of mass casualty attacks would leave behind zones of devastation sealed off for years, and a pall of mourning, anger, and fear hanging over our public and private lives." So when I stand back and look at these beliefs functioning all together as one sort of perspective, I can understand how the use of extreme measures may seem rational, and I can also understand why the compatibility argument is less persuasive to advocates of extreme measures. So I think I draw two implications from this inquiry into the psychology of national security. I think that we would be more effective advocates of rights if we were to take catastrophic scenarios more seriously. I think that if we conceded their possibility, if they played a more central role in our defense of rights, we would be less vulnerable, less open to the claim that we're missing the picture, we don't quite grasp what's really at stake. When I look at a lot of rights advocacy, literature, scholarship, etc., it is true, I think, that we do tend to focus more on the law than the consequences, what's at stake, the nature of the threat, and so on. In fact, when we do discuss the threat, and when I say we, once again I mean look at the large body of scholarship and advocacy out there for rights, we don't explore catastrophic threats in a lot of detail. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the rule of law. So I think on the one hand, if we were prepared to take that more seriously, we could be the foundation of a stronger defense. The other point I draw from it is that I think that from that perspective, they are correct about two things. That the nature of the threat is different. I think that that's a claim worth conceding. That we have nothing to fear in making that concession. Often people resist that concession because they think if you concede that the threat is different, you'll have to concede that the rules must change. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. And finally, we often suggest or imply or believe that the prospect of mass terror is unlikely. We seem to assume that we need not take it seriously because it's unlikely. But that's simply not something we have any evidence to support. We don't know the prospect and can't know the likelihood of a mass or nuclear terror attack. So again, I think we make a stronger defense of rights if we concede it's an unknowable threat, it's a serious threat, but nevertheless, the best way to deal with it is, through methods that don't involve the use of cruelty, inhumanity, torture. The best way is, for example, the Nuclear Security Summit, smart security measures. Kent Roach, for example, talks about spending less time making changes to the criminal law and more time safeguarding sensitive sites, that sort of thing. I think that's obviously a complicated issue that is for another day, but that would be the gist of my argument for smarter security measures. I look forward to your questions. Otherwise, thanks again.